Hi YouTube, Darth here. This is What's Up Wednesday, where I talk about topics off the top of my head and answer your questions from the previous week. This week I'm going to talk about free Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4 DLC, the failure of Premium, and where I think Battlefield 5 is heading. Then we'll get into your questions. First up, if you don't know, Battlefield 1's Apocalypse DLC is free starting yesterday and running until August 7th. Additionally, Battlefield 4's China Rising and Naval Strike DLCs are also free. Be sure to pick them up if you haven't already. With that out of the way, let's talk about Premium and DLC in the Battlefield series. I think the first signs of fatigue in the Premium model for the Battlefield franchise started appearing in Battlefield 4 and maybe even as far back as 3. Though I don't remember it receiving so much attention in Battlefield 3 since it was pretty much an industry standard at the time. Now in Battlefield 4 there were 4 DLC packs: China Rising, Second Assault, Naval Strike, and Dragon's Teeth, followed by some free maps. I think the discontent started nearly immediately with China Rising, as there were a lot of voices that were upset that DICE could even consider releasing DLC with the miserable state of Battlefield 4's launch. So it started off on some rocky footing. It only got worse from there, as Second Assault was really just a rehash of Battlefield 3 content, which is a complaint that could have been leveled at Battlefield 4 in general. But it was the heyday of the Premium model, so the DLCs must be made, and they must be made on a schedule. But here's where the real problem with the segmented DLCs sets in. Every time a new set of maps is released, it further fragmented the player community. Fewer and fewer people were able to play the latest content, leading to servers generally wanting to shy away from running DLC maps if they wanted to maintain player counts. And given that you could pick and choose what DLC you wanted, it could lead to some strange situations. Realistically, this was probably intended to just push people into purchasing all the DLC. I seem to recall the situation on console being worse than PC for reasons I can't quite remember at the moment. But the 1-2 knockout punches for the Premium model I believe were Battlefield Hardline and Star Wars Battlefront. Both of these titles couldn't hang on to players post-launch, and both were heavily invested into the Premium model. So the developers were on the hook to develop 4 DLC expansions to both games, both of which had relatively low player counts by the time the DLCs landed. I'm pretty sure EA noticed that there were a lot of developer resources being tied up in supporting games with low player counts. But I think the production of Battlefield 1 was too far along to change that model before that game launched. So they ran an experiment with Star Wars Battlefront 2 and new ways to monetize players post-launch. That failed spectacularly for a number of reasons. Now we're in a world where expansions are on a rotating free schedule to try and keep parity among players still playing what are essentially end-of-life Battlefield titles. I can't complain because this is a pretty nice gesture that isn't entirely necessary. But what is Battlefield 5 post-release monetization going to look like? If the last few months are any indication, loot boxes are out and customization is way in. Definitely something I'd like to see in detail with Gamescom later in August, but I have a sneaky suspicion they're going to be pretty coy about that until as close to release as possible. But that's getting into speculation territory, so let's answer some questions. The first comes from Tom Meyer. Or Mayer, I'm not sure. Here's a question you might want to answer down the pipeline. Do you think having 2 historical Battlefields in a row was a good move for the franchise? And to extend into this topic, what's your opinion on historical Battlefields like BF1, BF5 compared to modern military shooters like BF3, BF4? I hope you answer my question and keep up the great work. I'm really happy to see you back. Backward smiley face. Well, first of all, thank you, Tom. It's good to be back in the saddle again, and I'm hoping that Battlefield 5 really lives up to the hype and expectations I have for it after the initial alpha. As for the Battlefield franchise, I thought it was a bit interesting that DICE followed up Battlefield 1 with Battlefield 5, or more specifically that they followed it chronologically. I was hoping that they would keep a bit more varied to keep the series fresh, and I definitely was rooting for a return to the modern day. But it's not entirely surprising that they've chosen to go to World War II. The engine and team is already primed for making a game around that era, and they're probably trying to follow the launch success of Battlefield 1. Don't get me wrong, I'm definitely excited for a World War II game, but it wouldn't have been my first choice. Perhaps it's worth being slightly shy about another modern setting after 5 Battlefield titles have been there in recent memory. But it seems kinda weird to be playing Battlefield 4 to get that chronological setting fix all these years on. I don't just want my cake, I want all the cakes, and I'm going to eat them all simultaneously. As for historical shooters versus modern ones, if you had asked me which would have been better 15-20 years ago, I'd have probably said World War II shooters is where it's at. After Battlefield 2, I wasn't sure if modern gunplay could be done right in AAA. Counter-Strike had gotten it right many years prior, but it really took Modern Warfare to show developers how to make it work. Unfortunately, we're also still living in that game's shadow. So to sum it up, maybe it's good to get away from modern shooters for a good long break. Let the games industry figure out something new to do in that space. Hopefully we're not subjected to endless battle royales for the next 5 years. Next question comes from Captain Noob. Hey Darth, it's nice to see you posting content again. For my first question, what are your thoughts on Fallout 76, or the Fallout series in general? Would like to hear your opinions. Secondly, do you think tanks are overpowered in BF1? So the two Fallout games I played are Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, both of which I generally liked in doses. I played Fallout 3 to completion, and then again to see how many NPCs I could get away with murdering. If you're curious, it gets really boring in Rivet City when you run into waves of infinite guards. They're not my favorite Bethesda games, I much prefer the Elder Scrolls series. Mostly because after the 20th hour of seeing the same gray, brown, and gray color palette, I want to gouge my eyes out from the monotony of it all. As for Fallout 76, it looks like the New Vegas of this more recent series with multiplayer. Maybe if we hear more about distinguishing gameplay features, I'll perk up, but I wasn't interested in Fallout 4, so I have no clue why I'd be up for another Fallout game so soon. On the question of tanks in Battlefield 1 being overpowered, I think DICE took a lot of liberties with the gameplay of Battlefield 1, at least from a historical perspective. Yeah, they're powerful in Battlefield 1, but typically tanks of the era were slow and broke down frequently. Obviously that doesn't make for great gameplay, but the alteration to historical accuracy does give them what they want, which is vehicle gameplay closer to Battlefield 4. As for their relative power versus infantry, I think there's a lot that offsets their power, particularly the prolific amount of explosives that infantry are given against them. But my least favorite choice for Battlefield 1 was allowing tanks to repair without risk to the occupant. I realized that this was partly a choice to preserve the tank from theft, friendly or otherwise, but that was an extremely rare problem in previous Battlefield titles. Yeah, we all remember it happening because it sucks when friendlies steal a vehicle, but if I have to guess, it's probably happened in less than 1% of my games. Plus, you lose the fun reversal and skill differential of stealing enemy tanks. So talk about curing a cold with a boot to the head. There was a nice teamwork dynamic in previous Battlefield titles where the power of vehicles was amplified dramatically by having a two-man team that worked together. Something that I think Battlefield 1 generally lacked, especially because of the inclusion of the light tank, which only crewed one. But I digress. Now for one last question, or rather set of questions from Bane. Guess I have to ask something nice since I really like the idea of the series. Question 1. What you hope for customization in BFV? Would you hope to go back in BF4, or do you prefer BF1 simplified model, even though I probably already know which you like more? And what would you want to see as new customization in upcoming title? Question 2. Do you have any hobbies outside of Battlefield / making excellent content? What I'd love to see for customization in Battlefield 5 is some form of what we got for Battlefield 3 and 4. Pick a few perks for your vehicles, pick a few perks for your weapons, change how your soldier looks. We're definitely getting huge amounts of customization for soldier appearance, but the gameplay affecting customizations we've not really seen yet. There are some leads as to what we might be getting and the information available out there for companies and subclasses. So you'll be able to set up separate soldiers and kits, though to what degree the alpha didn't really give us an idea. I'd love to see deep options like in Battlefield 3 and 4 as the setting is relatively rich for opportunity. I mean, if I think about the Panzer IV as a model for upgrades and ways we could customize a vehicle, I get a bit of a historical tingle. You could have the base model as a starter, give it a 75mm gun upgrade, maybe add armor skirting, and wrap it with an electric powered turret that lets you turn your turret more quickly. There are tons of possibilities for the vehicles, and I think it would be a shame if we end up with a model for vehicles identical to Battlefield 1 where you have almost no choice and you can't customize short of picking which package deal you want. I think that model is a straitjacket that doesn't let players explore the mechanics of the game. I get that it's meant to protect them from bad choices, but removing choice is how you do that? Come on now. As for my hobbies, I'm generally either playing games, watching movies, or on the holidays I do some extreme cookie baking. We're talking like 10 dozen cookies a night every night throughout December. Most of those go to coworkers, but I get real fat around that time of the year, let me tell you what. If you're looking for a great cookie recipe, I'll put 2 of my favorites in the description below. I think you'll find that they are ridiculously delicious for the meager amount of work that has to go into them. If you had to pick one to start with, I recommend the cream cheese crinkles. But that's it for this episode of What's Up Wednesday. If you've got questions for my next episode, drop them in the comments below. I'm hoping to do these every week, so keep them coming even if I don't get them answered next week. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.